Upper middle class San Francisco tenants are demanding that their landlord pay them $250,000 to move out of their apartment so that the landlord's mother can move in. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over a situation in San Francisco. Obviously, San Francisco is not a landlord friendly place. In fact, it is the exact opposite. They hate landlords there. They want to torture them. They want them to pay out the yin yang to tenants who do not own properties, but feel like they deserve and they are entitled to subsidized living from their landlord. Okay, it's absolutely crazy the stuff that's going on there. They've got rent control, they've got extremely strong tenant protections, they've got just cause eviction protections, they've got pretty much everything that you hate to see all in one place. And anybody who owns property there, well, you know what? You're getting what you deserve because you should have known all this before you even bought the property, okay? And if you didn't, well, you're either naive or you are just a straight moron, okay? Because this stuff is well known. It's well known, okay? So the landlord in this story bought this property back in 2022, moved in with the intention of emptying out the second unit in it. I believe it's a duplex, right? Living in one of the units, emptying out the second unit of the tenant, and then having their mother move in. So great plan, except for the fact that this is San Francisco we're talking about there, right? And so you have to pay your tenants relocation expenses to get them the heck out of these old units, right? And the tenants are demanding more than just a small relocation expense. They want $250,000 to move out. Now, their logic is that, oh, well, the landlord's going to make this huge profit because they're not actually going to have the mom move in, right? Well, does it matter? Does it matter who the landlord wants to move in? To me, it doesn't, right? But to the city of San Francisco, if you want to remove a tenant from your property, you have to, it has to be for these little few justified reasons. And moving in a family member is one of those reasons, okay? So the big problem I have with all of this is that these tenants, they are not low income, struggling, hard up people, the people who these laws were meant to protect. Now, these are very high income, upper middle class people who are making these demands, right? So, when I talk about these tenant protections, they actually benefit the wealthy more than they benefit the lower income people. Well, this is a prime example of that, right? And it's hard to believe they even wrote an article about these people because they're not going to get much sympathy from pretty much anybody, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Okay, landlords out there, would you pay somebody $250,000 to leave one of your units? I know it seems like a dumb question, right? But maybe there's some landlords here who are from the San Francisco area, who are from places like New York or LA, where it's very hard and very expensive to remove tenants, and there is a big upside if you're able to raise the rents. But would you pay somebody $250,000 to leave one of your units? Okay. Now, obviously, to me, no, never, ever. There's not a single unit I own that is worth paying that much. But like I said, there's a wide variety of people watching these videos. And do you think a tenant ever deserves to get paid that much to move? Okay, even in these expensive places. I don't think so. I mean, personally, I think that it's a complete joke. And, if there's any other legal method of getting these tenants out of there rather than paying them that much money, then it should be used. Okay, so anyway, let's get into the article. This article is coming from 48hills.com, and it says, and oh, sorry, and it says, an eviction on Lake Street raises questions about the price of relocating tenants. A Kaiser doctor wants to toss family to move her mother into the unit. How much should she have to pay? And shouldn't that be part of the price of the property? And they're playing it off like, okay, well, this lady, she's a doctor, she makes good money, she owns other rental property, so she should be able to take the loss of paying off $250,000 to these tenants. And you know what? if she truly is moving in her mom, then she shouldn't have to pay anything. That's my personal opinion. Okay. But anyway, let's see what the article says. Okay. And remember, this article is written from a tenant's perspective. Okay. This is all pro tenant nonsense where landlord's always a bad guy. So I'm going to have to rip through the article as we're reading it. Lots of tenants get evicted in San Francisco, many of them for no fault of their own. Some are tossed out because speculators want to make money turning apartments into what are essentially condos using the Ellis Act. Some lose their homes because the landlord claims to want to move in or move a relative in. Many of these turn out to be fraudulent ways to replace rent controlled tenants with people who can pay higher rent. So, from the very first paragraph, they're playing this off like, hey, this landlord's probably being fraudulent. I don't know. Okay. It's possible, but you know what? You can't make that sort of assumption without knowing all the facts of the story. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. Then you have the frustrating situation where a tenant who is not a pauper is paying the rent and following all the rules gets displaced because someone richer wants the space. That's the case of 2444 Lake Street, a story that raises a larger issue about the amount a landlord who just bought a building should pay tenants in a no-fault eviction, and whether the tenant's income should be a factor in that decision. And absolutely, the tenant's income should be a factor in that decision because these laws were put in place not and if you think about the good intentions of these politicians, right? I don't agree with the laws whether it's for super poor people or for super rich people, right? But for the people who do believe in these laws were put into place because they wanted to help people who couldn't afford the cost of relocating, in such an expensive area. So, by that logic, it doesn't make sense to instead benefit these people who can afford a place in that area, who don't need assistance, who don't, like, it's the same argument I've always had against rent control. Rent control is not means tested. So, you could have somebody who's making $200 million a year who gets a rent controlled apartment. Somebody who doesn't need affordable housing could get a rent controlled unit. That doesn't make any sense. But this is the same argument I have against this whole situation that's going on here. Anthony Hernandez and Michelle Zimmerman live with their two kids in the lower unit of a duplex on Lake and 26th Street. She has a job in workplace experience for a fintech company. He's also a finance and operations guy who works with social equity cannabis entrepreneurs. Although he has been furloughed from his job, so they are living on one income. The apartment they rent is big enough that they have a spare room, which they use for an au pair, which sounds pretty luxurious until you realize how much it costs for childcare in this city. It can actually be cheaper if you have the space to give someone free room and board and a stipend to live in your house and take care of the kids than it is to pay for two kids in private school that can run $20,000 a year for each kid. Zimmerman has been living in the unit for 17 years now. They pay about $4,000 a month rent. So, they show a good image of how much money these people have right there. Okay, these people are paying $4,000 a month rent, which is more than the mortgage payment on my 4,200 square foot home that I'm sitting in right now recording this. Okay, with 5 bedrooms and 5 baths. Okay, they pay more in rent than I pay on mortgage, taxes, and insurance for my house. Okay, and they make better money than me if they can afford that because I couldn't afford $4,000 a month. But not only that, but they have a live-in nanny to watch. They call it an au pair, right? It's a live-in nanny to take care of their kids. Okay, these people make really, really good money, and we're supposed to believe that they need all these, benefits from all this anti-landlord garbage. No, these people would be just fine. Just told them to move, but you know what? They're greedy and they feel entitled, just like all the tenants do, in a place like San Francisco. So I'm going to skip down a little bit, right? Because you know what? This article, it goes over, like stuff about the landlord who they think is just trying to scam the system, right? But let's continue down here. It says the couple. I'm sorry. They aren't poor people, she said. They have an au pair. True, they probably won't be homeless, but they will pay a much higher rent since they've had rent control for 17 years and probably can't stay in the same part of town where their kid is going to school. So that paragraph there says a lot, okay? These people, the unit they're staying in is under rent control, okay? We're talking about people here who probably have income in excess of $200,000 a year. Like, and I know that doesn't sound like a lot to. Oh, that's nothing. I've heard so many people. Oh, that's nothing when you live in San Francisco. 200,000. You're basically broke. Yeah, whatever. Okay, that's a lot of money everywhere. Just because you choose to live in the most expensive place on earth doesn't mean that it's not a lot of money. Okay, so these people make a lot of money. They've got a live-in nanny living with them, and they're in a rent-controlled unit, and they're complaining because they won't be able to get a place that is as cheap as they have now with all. And I'm like, listen, you were lucky. You made out for 17 years on the backs of landlords who basically were subsidizing your living in your rent controlled unit, even though you don't deserve rent control, in my opinion. People who make good money should never get rent control. People who, in fact, nobody should get rent control. Let's make it really simple, okay? But by their logic, that rent control is supposed to be helping lower income people be able to afford housing. Well, upper middle class people don't deserve rent control. Upper class people don't deserve it by their logic, but they're not using their logic. Okay. Instead, they're trying to create a system where everybody gets, even people who don't need it. So what is that? What is that? To me, it just seems like greed. It seems like selfishness and greed, and all off of the backs of landlords. Okay, so man, it's a crazy story. There's a lot of details into it. It's pretty long. I'm gonna put a link to this story in the description of this article, but just keep in mind, in places like San Francisco, the people who benefit the most from rent control, from these strong tenant protections, etc., it is not the people who are lower income. It is these upper middle class yuppies who want cheap rent and want to live in the coolest, most awesome part of town in San Francisco for as cheap as possible.